Decoding Body Language. Slides by Yang Ao Wei. Most researchers generally agree that the verbal channel is used primarily for conveying information, while the nonverbal channel is used for negotiating interpersonal attitudes and, in some cases, is used as a substitute for verbal messages. The acquisition of knowledge and skills in nonverbal communication serves to make every encounter with another person an exciting experience. It is good to learn and to use positive open gestures to communicate with others, and to eliminate gestures that may give negative signals. This can make it more comfortable to be with people and can make you more acceptable to them. Part 1. A framework for understanding. Most of the basic communication gestures are the same all over the world. When people are happy, they smile. When they are sad or angry, they frown or scowl. On the other hand, just as verbal language differs from culture to culture, so the nonverbal language may also differ. Whereas one gesture may be common in a particular culture and have a clear interpretation, it may be meaningless in another culture or even have a completely opposite meaning. One of the most serious mistakes a novice in body language can make is to interpret a solitary gesture in isolation of other gestures or other circumstances. For example, scratching the head can mean a number of things, depending on the other gestures that occur at the same time. So we must always look at gesture clusters for a correct reading. Like any other language, body language consists of words, sentences, and punctuation. Each gesture is like a single word, and a word may have several different meanings. It is only when you put the word into a sentence with other words that you can fully understand its meaning. Gestures come in sentences, and invariably tell the truth about a person's feelings or attitudes. The perceptive person is one who can read the nonverbal sentences and accurately match them against the person's verbal sentences. When someone speaks the truth, his or her words or verbal sentences ought to be congruent to his or her nonverbal signals. According to Dr. Albert Moravian, a prominent psychologist who has done extensive studies on the subject of nonverbal communications, how messages are received and responded to during face-to-face communication shows that when an incongruity exists between the spoken word and how you deliver it, the following elements are taken into consideration: verbal content, vocal cues, and nonverbal signals. Research shows that nonverbal signals carry about 5 times as much impact as the verbal channel, and that when the two are incongruent, people rely on the nonverbal message, and the verbal content may be disregarded. Observation of gesture clusters and congruence of the verbal and nonverbal channels are the keys to accurate interpretation of body language. In addition to looking for gesture clusters and congruence of speech and body movement, all gestures should be considered in the context in which they occur. If, for example, someone was sitting at a bus terminal with arms and or legs tightly crossed and chin down, and it was a chilly winter's day, it would most likely mean that he or she was cold, not defensive. If, however, a person used the same gestures while you were sitting across the table from him or her, trying to sell him or her an idea, product, or service, they could be correctly interpreted as meaning that the person was negative or defensive about the situation. The speed of some gestures and how obvious they look to others is also related to the age of the individual. For example, if a 5-year-old child tells a lie to his or her parent, the mouth will be deliberately covered with one or both hands immediately afterwards. When a teenager tells a lie, the hand is brought to the mouth like that of a 5-year-old, but instead of the obvious hand-slapping gesture over the mouth, the fingers rub slightly around it or attempt to cover it partially. When an adult tells a lie, her hand covers her mouth in an attempt to block the deceitful words, but at the last moment the hand is pulled away from the face and a nose touch gesture results. This gesture is nothing more than the adult's sophisticated version of the mouth covering gesture that was used in childhood. This is an example of the fact that as an individual gets older, many of his gestures become sophisticated and less obvious, which is why it is often more difficult to read the gestures of a 50-year-old than those of a much younger person. Part 2. Palm gestures. One of the most valuable ways of discovering whether someone is being open and honest or not is to look for palm displays. Just as a dog will expose its throat to show submission or surrender to the victor, so the human animal uses his or her palms to display the same attitude or emotion. When someone begins to open up or be truthful, he will expose all or part of his palms to another person. Like most body language, this is a completely unconscious gesture, one that gives you a feeling or hunch that the other person is telling the truth. When a person is lying or concealing something, his palms are hidden behind his back, in his pockets, or in an arm-fold position when he tries to explain himself. It is possible to make yourself appear more credible by practicing open palm gestures when communicating with others. Conversely, as the open palm gestures become habitual, the tendency to tell untruths lessens. Interestingly, most people find it difficult to lie with their palms exposed, and the use of palm signals can in fact help to suppress some of the false information others may give. It also encourages them to be open with you. One of the least noticed but most powerful nonverbal signals is given by the human palm. When used correctly, the palm power invests its user with a degree of authority and the power of silent command over others. There are three main palm command gestures. The palm up position. The palm facing up is used as a submissive, non-threatening gesture, reminiscent of the pleading of a street beggar. The palm down position. When the palm is turned to face downwards, it signifies authority and dominance. The palm closed, finger pointed position. For this gesture, the palm is closed into a fist, and the pointed finger becomes a symbolic club with which the speaker figuratively beats his listener into submission. The pointed finger is one of the most irritating gestures that a person can use while speaking, particularly when it beats time to the speaker's words. If you are a habitual finger pointer, try practicing the palm up and palm down positions, and you will find that you create a more relaxed attitude and have a more positive effect on other people. Part 3. Hand and arm gestures. Rubbing the hands together is a way in which people non-verbally communicate positive expectations. The speed at which a person rubs his palms together signals whom he thinks will receive the positive results that are expected. Say, for example, you want to buy a home and you go to see a real estate agent. After describing the property you are seeking, the agent rubs her palms together quickly and says, "I've got just the right place for you." The agent has signaled that she expects the results to be to your benefit. But how would you feel if she rubbed her palms together very slowly as she told you that she had the ideal property? She would then appear to be crafty or devious, and would give you the feeling that the expected results would be to her advantage rather than yours. Salespeople are taught that if they use the palm rub gesture when describing products or services to prospective buyers, they should be certain to use a fast hand action to avoid putting the buyers on the defensive. When the buyer rubs her palms together and says to the salesperson, "Let's see what you have to offer," it's a signal that the buyer is expecting to be shown something good and is likely to make a purchase. A word of warning: a person who is standing at a bus terminal in freezing winter conditions and who rubs his palms together briskly may not be doing this because he is expecting a bus. He does it because his hands are cold. According to master negotiators Nierenberg and Colero, the hands clenched position is a frustration gesture, despite the fact that the person may be smiling, signaling that he or she was holding back a negative attitude. The gesture has two main positions: hands clenched in front or close to the face, and hands resting on the desk or the lap when seated. There also appears to be a correlation between the height at which the hands are held and the strength of the person's negative mood. That is, the higher the hands are placed, the more difficult the mood would be to handle. People who are confident, superior types, or who use minimal or restricted body gestures often use the steepling hands gesture, and, by doing so, they signal their confident attitude. This fascinating gesture is frequently used in superior-subordinate interaction and can also be an isolated gesture which indicates a confident or know-it-all attitude. The gesture has two versions. The raised steeple, which is normally taken when the steepler is giving his opinions or ideas and is doing the talking, and the lowered steeple, which is normally used when the steepler is listening rather than speaking. Although the steeple gesture is a positive signal, it can be used in either positive or negative circumstances and may be misinterpreted. For example, a salesman is presenting his product to a potential buyer. Toward the end of the sales presentation, the customer takes one of the steeple positions. If the steeple follows a series of positive gestures like open palms, leaning forward, head up, etc., which appear when the salesman shows the buyer the solution to his problem, then he has been given a cue to close the sale, ask for the order, and expect to get it. On the other hand, if the steeple gesture follows a series of negative gestures, such as arm folding, leg crossing, looking away, and numerous hand-to-face gestures, and if the buyer takes the steeple position towards the close of the sales presentation, the buyer may not buy, or they may try to get rid of the salesman. In both these cases, the steeple gesture means confidence, but one has positive results and the other negative consequences for the salesman. The movements preceding the steeple gesture are the keys to the outcome. One palm gripping the other hand behind the back is a superiority or confidence gesture position. It also allows the person to expose his vulnerable stomach, heart, and throat regions to others in an unconscious act of fearlessness. A tip: if you take this position when you are in a high-stress situation, such as being interviewed by newspaper reporters or simply waiting outside a dentist's surgery, you will feel quite relaxed, confident, and even authoritative. The palm-in-palm gesture should not be confused with the hand-gripping wrist gesture, which is a signal of frustration and an attempt at self-control. In this case, one hand grips the other wrist or arm very tightly, as if it is an attempt by one arm to prevent the other from striking out. Interestingly, the further the hand is moved up the back, the more angry the person has become. Also, the further the hand is moved up, the greater the attempt at self-control. It is this type of gesture that has given rise to such expressions as "get a grip on yourself." Thumbs most often protrude from people's pockets, sometimes from the back pockets in a secretive manner, to try to hide the person's dominant attitude. Dominant or aggressive women also use this gesture. The women's movement has allowed them to adopt many so-called male gestures and positions. Arms folded with thumbs pointing upwards is another popular thumb gesture position. This is a double signal, being that of a defensive or negative attitude, folded arms, plus a superior attitude, displayed by the thumbs. Part 4. Hand-to-face gestures. Recognition of the nonverbal deceit gestures can be one of the most important observation skills one can acquire. One of the most commonly used symbols of deceit is that of the three wise monkeys who hear, speak, and see no evil. The hand-to-face actions depicted form the basis of the human deceit gestures. In other words, when we see, speak, and hear untruths or deceit, we often attempt to cover our mouths, eyes, or ears with our hands. When someone uses a hand-to-face gesture, it does not always mean that he or she is lying. It does, however, indicate that the person may be deceiving you, and further observation of his other gesture clusters can confirm your suspicions. It is important that you do not interpret hand-to-face gestures in isolation. The mouth guard is one of the few adult gestures that is as obvious as a child's. The hand covers the mouth, and the thumb is pressed against the cheeks as the brain subconsciously instructed to try and suppress the deceitful words that are being said. Sometimes this gesture may only be several fingers over the mouth, or even a closed fist, but its meaning remains the same. If the person who is speaking uses this gesture, it indicates that he is telling a lie. If, however, he covers his mouth while you are speaking, it indicates that he feels you are lying. In essence, the nose touch gesture is a sophisticated disguised version of the mouth guard gesture. It may consist of several light rubs below the nose, or it may be one quick, almost imperceptible touch. Some women perform this gesture with small, discreet strokes to avoid smudging their makeup. One explanation of the origin of the nose touch gesture is that as the negative thought enters the mind, the subconscious instructs the hand to cover the mouth, but at the last moment, in an attempt to appear less obvious, the hand pulls away from the face and a quick nose touch gesture is the result. But what if the person only has an itchy nose? Is frequently asked. The itch in a person's nose is normally satisfied by a very deliberate rubbing or scratching action, as opposed to the light strokes of the nose touch gesture. Like the mouth guard gesture, it can be used both by the speaker to disguise his own deceit and by the listener who doubts the speaker's words. The eye rub is the brain's attempt to block out the deceit, doubt, or lie that it sees, or to avoid having to look at the face of the person to whom he is telling the lie. Men usually rub their eyes vigorously, and if the lie is a big one, they will often look away, normally towards the floor. Women use a small, gentle rubbing motion just below the eye, either because they have been brought up to avoid making robust gestures, or to avoid smudging makeup. They also avoid a listener's gaze by looking at the ceiling. The ear rub is, in effect, an attempt by the listener to hear no evil, in trying to block the words by putting the hand over or around the ear. This is the sophisticated adult version of the hands over both ears gesture used by the young child who wants to block out his parents' reprimands. Other variations of the ear rub gesture include rubbing the back of the ear, the finger drill, where the fingertip is screwed back and forth inside the ear, pulling at the earlobe, or bending the entire ear forward to cover the ear hole. This last gesture is a signal that the person has heard enough or may want to speak. In the neck scratch, the index finger of the writing hand scratches below the earlobe, or may even scratch the side of the neck. Observations of this gesture reveal an interesting point. The person usually scratches about 5 times. Rarely is the number of scratches less than 5. Rarely is it more than 5. This gesture is a signal of doubt or uncertainty and is characteristic of the person who says, "I'm not sure I agree." Research into the gestures of those who tell lies revealed that the telling of a lie caused a tingling sensation in the delicate facial and neck tissues, and a rub or a scratch was required to satisfy it. This seems to be a reasonable explanation of why some people use the collar pull gesture when they tell a lie and suspect that they have been caught. It is almost as if the lie causes a slight trickle of sweat to form on the neck when the deceiver feels that you suspect he is lying. When you see someone use this gesture, questions like, "Would you repeat that, please?" or "Could you clarify that point, please?" can cause the would-be deceiver to give the game away. This gesture is also used when a person is feeling angry or frustrated and needs to pull the collar away from his neck in an attempt to let the cool air circulate around it. An exaggerated version of the collar pull gesture is the palm rubbing the back of the neck in what is called the pain in the neck gesture. A person who uses this when lying usually avoids your gaze and looks down. This gesture is also used as a signal of frustration or anger, and when this is the case, the hand slaps the back of the neck first and then begins to rub the neck. Let us assume, for example, that you had asked a subordinate to complete a certain task for you and that the subordinate had forgotten to do it within the required time. When you asked him for the results, he non-verbally signals his forgetfulness by slapping his head, either on the forehead or on the back of the neck, as if he were symbolically hitting himself. Although slapping the head communicates forgetfulness, the person signals how he feels about you or the situation by the position used when he slaps his hand on his head, either the forehead or the neck. If he slaps his forehead, he signals that he is not intimidated by your having mentioned his forgetfulness. But when he slaps the back of his neck, he non-verbally tells you that you are literally a pain in the neck for pointing out his error. Those who habitually rub the back of their necks have a tendency to be negative or critical, whereas those who habitually rub their foreheads to non-verbalize an error tend to be more open, easygoing people. When a person is under pressure, the fingers are placed in the mouth. Whereas most hand-to-mouth gestures involve lying or deception, the fingers in the mouth gesture is an outward manifestation of an inner need for reassurance. Giving the person guarantees and assurances is appropriate when this gesture appears. Part 5. Arm barriers. Hiding behind a barrier is a normal human response that we learn at an early age to protect ourselves. By folding one or both arms across the chest, a barrier is formed that is, in essence, an attempt to block out the impending threat or undesirable circumstances. One thing is certain. When a person has a nervous, negative, or defensive attitude, he will fold his arms firmly on his chest, a strong signal that he feels threatened. The standard arm cross gesture is a universal gesture signifying the same defensive or negative attitude almost everywhere. It is commonly seen when a person is among strangers in public meetings, queues, cafeterias, elevators, or anywhere that people feel uncertain or insecure. When you see the arm cross gesture occur during a face-to-face encounter, it is reasonable to assume that you may have said something with which the other person disagrees. So it may be pointless continuing your line of argument even though the other person may be verbally agreeing with you. The fact is that the nonverbal medium does not lie. The verbal medium does. Your objective at this point should be to try to discover the cause of the arms folded gesture and to move the person into a more receptive position. Remember, as long as the arms folded gesture remains, the negative attitude will remain. The attitude causes the gesture to occur, and prolonging the gesture forces the attitude to remain. A simple but effective method of breaking the folded arms position is to hand the person a pen, a book, or something that forces him to unfold his arms to reach forward. This moves him into a more open posture and attitude. Asking the person to lean forward to look at a visual presentation can also be an effective means of opening the folded arms position. If, as well as the full arm cross gesture, the person has clenched fists, it indicates a hostile and defensive attitude. This cluster is often combined with clenched teeth and red face, in which case a verbal or physical attack may be imminent. The person using this gesture cluster has an attacking attitude. The full arm cross gesture is sometimes too obvious to use around others because it tells them that we are fearful. Occasionally, we substitute a subtler version, the partial arm cross, in which one arm swings across the body to hold or touch the other arm to form the barrier. The partial arm barrier is often seen at meetings where a person may be a stranger to the group or is lacking in self-confidence. Another popular version of a partial arm barrier is holding one's hands with oneself, a gesture commonly used by people who stand before a crowd to receive an award or give a speech. Renowned ethologist and author Desmond Morris said that this gesture allows a person to relive the emotional security that he experienced as a child when his parent held his hand under fearful circumstances. Disguised arm cross gestures are highly sophisticated gestures used by people who are continually exposed to others. This group includes politicians, salespeople, television personalities, and the like, who do not want their audience to detect that they are unsure of themselves or nervous. Like all arm cross gestures, one arm swings across in front of the body to grasp the other arm, but instead of the arms folding, one hand touches a handbag, bracelet, watch, shirt cuff, or other object on or near the other arm. Once again, the barrier is formed and the secure feeling is achieved. Women are less obvious than men in their use of disguised arm barrier gestures because they can grasp such things as handbags or purses when they become unsure of themselves. One of the most common versions of this is holding a glass of beer or wine with two hands. The use of two hands allows the nervous person to form an almost undetectable arm barrier. Part 6. Leg barriers. Like arm barrier gestures, crossed legs are a signal that a negative or defensive attitude may exist. The purpose of crossing the arms on the chest was originally to defend the heart and upper body region, and crossing the legs is an attempt to shield the genital area. Care should be taken when interpreting crossed leg gestures with women, as many have been taught that this is how to sit like a lady. Unfortunately for them, however, the gesture can make them seem defensive. In a standard leg cross, one leg is crossed neatly over the other, usually the right over the left, and may be used to show a nervous, reserved, or defensive attitude. However, this is usually a supportive gesture that occurs with other negative gestures and should not be interpreted in isolation or out of context. When the crossed legs gesture is combined with crossed arms, the person has withdrawn from the conversation. This pose is popular among women in most countries, particularly to show their displeasure with a husband or boyfriend. The figure 4 leg lock indicates that an argumentative or competitive attitude exists and is the sitting position used by many males who have a competitive nature. The person who has a hard and fast attitude in an argument or debate will often lock the figure 4 into place with one or both hands, using them as a clamp. This is a sign of the tough-minded, stubborn individual who may need a special approach to break through his resistance. The next time you attend a meeting or function, you will notice small groups of people all standing with their arms and legs crossed. Observation will also reveal that they are standing at a greater distance from each other than the customary one, and that, if they are wearing coats or jackets, they are usually buttoned. If you were to question these people, you would find that one or all of them are strangers to the others in the group. This is how most people stand when they are among people whom they do not know well. The ideas from this video were adapted from Body Language: How to Read Other Thoughts by Their Gestures by Allan Pease.